maybe their job is really going to go bye-bye, right? Maybe it really is going to be on the chopping block. So what can they do today to get better? Can they go learn how to be prompt engineers? Is there some other job that won't be impacted in their lifetime that they could go and upscale and go do and still be able to, care for themselves?
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work, episode 292. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. And of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: Alexander Hurst published an interesting, relevant, and I will say clickbaity article in The Guardian online titled Taylor Swift, the Pope, and Putin. In the age of AI and deepfakes, who do you trust? Hurst writes that generative AI tools are being used to spread misinformation and damage reputations. He highlights recent examples such as the creation of explicit images of Taylor Swift and the manipulation of the Pope's image. This is part of a broader trend of, quote, newsfluencers and authoritarian regimes exploiting social media to fracture our shared reality and undermine democracy. Hurst warns that as the technology behind deepfakes continues to improve, it will become increasingly difficult to discern truth from fiction, fueling conspiracy theories and eroding public trust. He concludes that traditional approaches like transparency and labeling may be insufficient and calls for a more comprehensive solution to address the challenge. We will continue discussing what it means to lead in what I call the post-truth era. The more we can engage in a dialogue now, the faster we can come up with responsible solutions. To all entrepreneurs listening, there's limitless opportunity to innovate here. And of course, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. Now shifting to today's conversation. Chris Dyer is a recognized company culture and future of work expert who delivers keynotes and has done so for over 15 years to audiences around the world. As a CEO managing thousands of people, his companies consistently are named best places to work, and they've been named fastest growing companies by Inc. magazine 5 times. Inc. magazine ranked Chris as the #1 leadership speaker on culture. He has published 3 best-selling books and has been named #5 on the Leadership Power List. He's a top 40 change management guru, a top 50 global thought leader, and is the host of a top 50 leadership podcast. Chris is also an avid hiker, musician, and world traveler. And without further ado, Chris, it's my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into the space.
Dan, thanks so much for having me. And I think after what you just said, I don't know if I need to say anything else, but I'm probably the only thing to add is I'm an accidental everything, which means I have just fallen into things by saying yes and by being willing to try something new or to be curious about something. So I became a speaker on accident because I thought that might be a good place to go find new clients. And then someone along the way was like, "Hey, we want you to write a book." And I said, "Have you talked to my 5th grade teacher? Because she said I would never be an author. Are you sure?" And so I said yes. And then that turned in, over time into 3 books. And so a lot of the times, a lot of the things that I feel like have happened that people say about me, which I'm very appreciative of and flattered and feel just lucky that they've happened, it's been dumb luck. And maybe just the power of saying yes and the power of being curious is what got me here. Everything else, there was so many people and fantastic employees and mentors and friends that have been, a support system to make sure that I've been successful. And, I'm certainly not a genius. I'm just curious. And I think that's what kind of makes me excited about the world.
Because companies all over the world seek you out for advice on culture and strategy, and you want to talk to you about the future of work. I'd be curious, as you give these talks and meet teams, what's the pulse of the world in terms of how employees feel about the introduction of AI into the workplace? Are employees in general apprehensive? Are they enthusiastic? Are they somewhere in between? What are you hearing?
Yeah, so it does run the spectrum, but I think what is scary is how ignorant they are to what is really happening. They think they know, they think they have some basis and understanding that, hey, there's this thing and it might get better, or maybe it's something like they've seen in sci-fi movies. But they're generally and pretty woefully ignorant to what is really happening and what they could do with that to make their lives better and to be a better employee and to be more valuable to the organization, and where the risk might lie for them, right? And where their jobs may be taken away. If I'm talking to a group of leaders, in that senior leadership group, and they have a pretty good idea, they're pretty attuned to it. And I'm talking to an average, like middle manager at somewhere, they have no clue. They still don't really understand. So that is a challenge for companies, for leaders, for society, that we've got to help people understand. I think the second thing that they're really struggling with is the rapid pace of change. And so a lot of what I come in to talk about with organizations, whether it's at a big conference or maybe it's just, at their retreats or whatever it may be, or leadership trainings, is to understand that the innovation cycles keep getting shorter, right? Somebody years ago that had steam power maybe went their whole life until we suddenly were like using dams for electricity and things like this. Now in our lifetime, like we maybe had pagers and we had a flip phone and then a smartphone. And so in our lifetime, we're going through several waves of innovation, and the amount of change that's happening to us is pretty radical compared to what most human beings have had to go through. So that's the second area where we really try to help people in understanding why it feels different and why there's so much change, and what they can do to, again, take advantage of it.
So there's this complicated narrative that I think you and I, in our roles, both confront. Oftentimes, even as AI optimists, I'm going to call you an AI optimist like I am, you might be talking to an industry or an organization where automation is likely to disrupt some jobs. Do you ever feel like it's your obligation to acknowledge that disruption via innovation is ahead? Or, do you find, are you ever compromised because you're being looked to maybe always take the positive side, but sometimes there is the case where certain jobs are likely to be disrupted?
Right. So there is a way to always take a positive, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to tell people that everything's going to be the same and that they don't have to change, or they don't have to somehow upskill themselves or modify their work or what have you. Maybe their job is really going to go bye-bye, right? Maybe it really is going to be on the chopping block. So what can they do today to get better? Can they go learn how to be prompt engineers? Is there some other job that won't be impacted in their lifetime that they could go and upskill and go do and still be able to, care for themselves? The long-term issue that we'll have to wrestle with as a society is if AI can get so good that it's like in the sci-fi movies where it does everything for us, whether that's, Star Trek or the Jetsons or whatever, version of that you want to look at, that we don't really need to work, then what do we do? And that's a whole other societal thing, right? Do we walk around writing poetry and painting all day and we don't really need money and the computers just do everything? I don't know. Well, you and I probably won't be around for that, but that's something probably out of their control. But I want to focus them on what can they control today and what can they do today to get better. And they may have to shift. I mean, if you're driving a truck today, I'm telling those people, you need to go get a new skill and you need to be prepared, because there's a joke among the big top CEOs, which is, I love my work if it weren't for employees and customers. And that means if whatever they could do to replace you as the employee, they would do, right? Employees are a pain in their butt. They got to deal with compliance and payroll and the laws and getting sued and, grievances and people not coming in and product. It's hard to manage people. So if they could, like Amazon's doing in warehouses, if they can put a robot in there to pick up the boxes and do it for them, and they eliminate all the workers' comp claims, they're going to do it. So let's not be, too positive, toxically positive there to be like, no, that won't happen. It's going to happen. So what other job can you go do that isn't an issue? And in any ways of change are going to be people displaced. And that's my belief, that's the government's role to step in and try to help those people. But for the average person, they have a responsibility to go figure out what that is and go take advantage of it.
So to your point, I don't think the bot apocalypse is going to happen in our lifetime, probably not in our kids' lifetime. But I think it's very much in the scope of, the span of our careers, certainly our kids' careers, that you'll be able to do 5 days of work in 4 days. And that could happen in the next 5 years. That's not science fiction. What does the future of work look like when our capacity improves, let's just say 20%? What's your coaching about? What do you do with the extra 20%? Do you work harder? Do you find a second job? Do you pursue a hobby? What does the world look like when everyone's got a 20% productivity dividend?
Yeah, it's probably going to depend on where you live, right? So there's going to be parts of the world where they're going to take that 20% and they're going to make their lives richer and their family life better and their communities better. And they're going to take that time and reinvest it back into their society. And they're going to be better for it. And that could really start to upend some of the, the power that be with some of the largest, countries in the world. America could take advantage of this, right, in a way that would really be fantastic. But we don't seem to be able to create any real change. We've been in deadlock for years and years in government, regardless of who you care is the president or who's in Congress. We've been deadlocked it feels like for 20 years with no real shift. And you could say we already are at the point. I've heard Bernie Sanders on the news the other day talking. We're already at the point we should be at 32 hours, given all the technological advances, given all of that. We should be at a 32-hour work week. And we're not. We're nowhere near that. And as Americans, we would probably take that extra day and go, can I go drive for Uber? Can I go do this? Can I go do that? To go make extra money for my family so I can go buy and consume more. That's a very American perspective. Whereas if you were to go to Denmark, if you were to go to Norway, go to Sweden, and go somewhere else, they're probably saying, I could take that extra day and go volunteer, and I could go help people in an elderly home, and I could, make sure there's not homeless, or we could. Totally different perspective. So it will depend on where you are. Personally, I would love it if people actually could spend more time making society better. This is a very tangent thought on your comment, but I've often thought, wouldn't it be great instead of a lot of countries have a mandatory military service? And some of that's for protection, but honestly, a lot of it's for getting people to be on the same page and getting them from all different walks of life to come and work together when they're young so they have perspectives and be able to take care of each other and think of each other as they get older. There's more to it than just having troops. Wouldn't it be cool if everyone had to join the Army Corps of Engineers, or like everyone had to join like the American version of the Peace Corps or whatever, right? Like you had to go and spend a year or two after high school and go volunteer and go make our country better somehow, doing some project and meet other people and do all that stuff. Like, wouldn't that radically change our perspectives and our in dialogues and our politics and our just the quality of our country, right? So maybe my dream now is, could we take that extra day of work and turn that into going and making the world a better place, or making actually, that's probably the wrong way to think about it, because that's so obtuse to people. They can't even put their head. Go make your neighborhood better. Like, that would be great. Can we go make your neighborhood better?
Perennially, the Scandinavian countries always rank at the top of the best quality of life.
Yeah.
And if you look at the data, it's very clear that those are countries where your day job doesn't define who you are. And the American ethos is such that your day job defines who you are, your self-worth, your ability to provide for your family. Do you envision a time? I mean, it seems like such a radical concept that here in America, the ethos could change to the point where we would celebrate, all the ways that we could give back in that extra day in ways that would potentially benefit everyone more than the extra 8 hours that you're working in the week. Is that in itself a notion that's just fictitious?
The only way America makes that kind of radical shift is by having an outside force. And to give a good example, the only way remote work actually took off and became such radically, okay for a period of time, and now more people, if you take outside of COVID, more people have remote and hybrid work than they've ever had, is because of a pandemic, right? It wasn't because we thought it was a good idea or it's better for people, or it's a better way to work, or whatever. It was like, no, a pandemic made us do it. So it's probably going to be a pandemic, war, major economic shift. Like there has to be some outside influence, in my opinion, that will force maybe that shift in thinking. Otherwise, we're just going to we have this mindset of we must always have GDP growth. We must always have profitability growth. We must always be adding more jobs. That's not sustainable. From what I remember reading from economists and being in school, like at some point that just, you can't keep that up, right? I mean, Rome fell at some point, and hopefully not in our lifetimes, but could there be a shift? I certainly hope so. And it would make the world a better place. We probably get away with that. And the really interesting book I read years ago, we probably get away with what we're doing because generally for our country, our weather is pretty good. And in those Scandinavian countries, like there is you better be good to your neighbor and you better take the time that you need to take care of your things for your family and your neighborhood because winter's coming. You're going to have this terrible time. And we have that in our country, but most of our country is generally mild. We have the resources that we don't have to chop wood, most of us, for warmth in the winter, those kinds of things. There's a different mentality, right? And it's the same thing if you go to somewhere like in Italy. In Milan, they might think that way a little bit more, but the rest of the country is not going to think that way. They're going to think more like Americans, right? We might as well work. We might as well go do more stuff. So, it's there's so many factors here of like weather and politics and I don't know. So maybe AI is that big. Maybe we don't need another pandemic. Maybe AI is the big catalyst.
Okay, so continuing to take the over on how and even when AI will disrupt jobs, two case studies. Amazon comes out and says, as they've introduced more robots and automation into the distribution centers, jobs have not gone away. They've just gotten safer. So people have to travel less distance. They're being monitored for health signals. The auto manufacturing industry. Look, since like the 50s, we've been introducing automation into factories. And I don't know if it comes as a surprise to anyone listening, but we've only increased the number of jobs in automobile manufacturing. And they've shifted to more thought work, design work, computer-aided design, other things. But the number of jobs of humans employed to manufacture cars has not gone down. What do you think those two case studies say about the future of work? Is it too Pollyanna-ish to say that's how innovation impacts jobs, or are they onto something?
Yeah, there's two things I want to think about here. One, the level of AI that's come in now is helping and supporting, right, where people are at right now. But I just saw a giant thing on the news all about how Amazon having these robots do all of the heavy lifting. So they are still in the works of replacing those workers, right, in that regard. Now, the second part of why maybe Amazon is still seeing more jobs or current levels of jobs and why the companies are is because the economy is still going really well and we're still buying cars and we're still doing all this stuff. And so at this moment of this podcast, we're still on this uptrend. And if there's a downtrend, which there should be at some point, given history, will that stay true? Or will they just go insert even more? Are they holding back on any of it so that when that dip happens, they can justify laying off 10,000 people, bringing in more of that technology, and then never rehiring those people when the economy gets better again? That feels more like the corporate America I know. And, they'll wait for that time because it will save face. It's not like we're going to lay 10,000 people off and we're introducing robots. They still remember the 80s and the 90s when when we did replace some robots and we did have some efficiencies, and it was like a huge problem, right? It was a big deal for a lot of organizations in the press and everything. So I don't know if they want that fight again. I think they might wait.
And if you go back as far as the first industrial revolution, 18th century in England, there was this band of rabble rousers called the Luddites, and they were threatened by machines, and they would go and have nighttime raids on the factories and actually physically break the machines. So we've always had, for hundreds of years, a very complicated relationship as humans with machines. And I think maybe, some of that is being exacerbated by AI, but typically the humans that are on the right side of innovation are the ones that come out ahead. And it can be a complicated conversation to have, certainly with line workers in this day and age. What's your message to those line workers who have that kind of, that undercurrent of the Luddism kind of populist revolt against the machines? Is that, are those fears founded, or what would you coach them to do to not be the ones breaking machines and to be on the right side of innovation?
I mean, they have to start now. And the good news is there's so much free stuff out there to be able to begin to learn and to do. They might need help too, right? And so maybe we don't want to leave them on the totally on an island to try to figure out, is my job going to go away and what should I do? Because they could easily say, I should go be a truck driver when we know those jobs may be going away. And there may be automated trucks here in our lifetime. They need to retool and get retrained and think about even relocating if that's what's needed to be able to, sustain this. What they don't want to do is be left, in the dark and totally surprised by this. So there are lots of people talking about what those types of jobs might be. But if you're in the position that you've done nothing and your only resort now is to try to go and destroy the robot that took your job, they'll just make another robot. Right? I mean, that's a small price to pay, and they probably have insurance for that. You haven't really done a lot. Maybe you got on the news and you got your 15 minutes of fame, and I know maybe you're making license plates now in the state penitentiary, but that doesn't seem like a great way to go. This is actually a really interesting thought, and I'm struggling a little bit to say, what does that person do? Let's just say you're working in Amazon and your job is folding that box every day. I mean, my son did that job for a while. And there's going to be a robot coming to change that. What do you do? Like, where do you go? If that is where you're at, based on your education, where your life choices, the opportunities that you had or didn't have growing up, like whatever that equation was that got you into that job today, which impacts where you can go tomorrow, because you're not going to go sign up to be the CEO of Amazon tomorrow. Right? You're not making that kind of jump. Where do you go? I don't know. That's a good question.
This answer is going to come across maybe as tone deaf for certain parts of the world that aren't as privileged as we are, but I firmly believe that your son has an opportunity to be the one managing the bots and, controlling them and making sure they're safe, making sure that, the robot arm doesn't swing and, hit a human on the factory floor, collecting the data. Maybe there's an opportunity to improve how the boxes are made that's more environmentally friendly. If I just take that one use case and unpack it, oh my gosh, there's so many amazing things that knowledge workers could be doing to make the process safer, cheaper, faster, better, while still embracing the fact that the job of, putting the box together, not the best thing for a human to do all day. But there are a bunch of ancillary tasks that I think are absolutely only ever going to get done by humans.
Someone's got to service the bots. Someone has to upgrade their firmware. Someone has to, I don't know. So there is those things there. That's not enough to totally, it's not a one-to-one swap for people who are probably in those factories. But if you're smart, a lot of those people could shift over to that. So maybe you need to start getting interested in that type of stuff. Or that doesn't interest you, then what else can you do, right? There's probably going to be innovations in kitchens. That's going to displace some people. And that's one that's really interesting, because the kitchen is a place where some people who have the hardest time getting a job in our society end up. And that's everything from someone who's been in and out of jail, who's dealt with drugs, to someone who is not legally here in our country. There's a whole span of people who are considered undesirable from an unemployment standpoint, and yet they seem to find themselves in a kitchen. It is a refuge, and it is a place where someone can go and get paid and work hard. And if they take those jobs, maybe they're not going to take the 3 Michelin star jobs away, but are they going to take away, will McDonald's be completely automated, right? Will Denny's be completely automated? Will your waiter or waitress be a robot? Will it be Rosie the Riveter, or not Rosie from the Jetsons, right? Will it be something like that coming over, and there really isn't anybody, maybe 1 or 2 humans managing everything, but that's it. I don't know. Maybe it's security. Maybe with so much of that coming, maybe human beings can do whatever they want. There's no other human to tell them no. Maybe we'll need more security and more enforcement people to maintain order and, I don't know, general politeness in society. Maybe maybe that's a shift. I just suddenly had this idea of if there's no employee telling you can't do that thing, how far do people take their bad behaviors? And so, is there a person in the room just to make sure no one's acting like a jerk?
So let's see. My kids are 14 and 16. What ages are your kids?
So mine are a little older. They're 26, 25, and 27, 26, and 24.
Okay,
And
so
then I
they're in
have
the
a
workplace.
Yeah, and I have a grandson who's 3. So it's my one who's 3. I'm a little bit more worried about it because there's so much change. Like, which way do you point him?
Yeah, so we're coaching, let's say your 3-year-old or my girls, and we're thinking about what are the skills that they should be cultivating. Your 3-year-old's got a few years, or your grandson, but what are the skills that are future proof that are never likely to be outsourced to a machine?
That's tough because a year ago you might have said musician, but now they've got AI that can write songs, and you might have said chef, and they've got robots making food. Right now, probably something in the medical field. Like it feels like nurses and doctors, dentists, those types of jobs feel a bit more insulated. Now, will they eventually have innovation and will that come to them? Of course. But that feels there's low-hanging fruit for AI and the innovation, and those industries don't feel like they're them. And they're very regulated and a lot of compliance in there and complexity. And is your nurse going to be a robot that doesn't feel like that's a job? So that's an area, right? So which jobs would be really hard for them to go and do that to? So that feels like the first place to go. If they can ever figure out autonomous cars, everyone who drives for Uber and Lyft is screwed. And that's a major employer around the world. Not maybe not officially an employer, but as a company providing funds for your tasks around the world. And that could radically change. So I would say where is there the most complexity and compliance and laws and those types of barriers to entry for innovation and all of that. And that may be a place where you're a little bit safer. For my 3-year-old grandson, maybe less secure. For your kids in their teens, that might be a bit safer, right? Then you have the whole other problem, though. Is that even what they want to do with their lives? That's a whole other thing, right? They're talking a lot about this prompt engineering being a big job right now and it's big money. And it feels like that's going to get just destroyed at some point. At some point, the AI is going to be able to figure that out and have enough repetitions to say, doesn't matter how you ask me, I'm going to know what you want.
I believe that anything
sports star we can add to the list, but again, this is not.
We'll see. I think the Paris Olympics will be exciting because of the humanness of the games. The gear that they wear may make them seem like robots, but I certainly think entertainment and certainly athletics, I don't want to outsource that part to a bot.
There has been this argument, people have been saying, what if we had a separate Olympics and it was like you could do all the drugs you wanted and use all the equipment you want and have all of the help you want. Over here, we'll do just the regular humans, and over here, we'll have
clean Olympics versus the dirty Olympics.
Right. And just like this, if that's what you want to do, if you want to, great, come on over here. Right. So it'd be interesting.
I believe that anything that requires empathy or judgment, rational thinking is something that, for example, when your 3-year-old your grandson is ready for kindergarten, I don't think that there will ever be a bot teaching 5-year-olds phonics. I just think, certain things, it's such an innate part of the human experience. Similarly, coaching employees in a workplace, I think we can automate the process of doing reviews and summarizing maybe your growth areas, but that process of delivering coaching and being empathetic and thinking about what it means to take care of a whole employee, a whole person, I don't think you can ever teach a bot compassion. I don't think that's too controversial, but I believe that there's going to be an explosion of opportunities related to those things that are innate to the human experience.
What's really interesting to add on to that point is my wife's a teacher, and for years, everything was get in the technology. They got to have iPads. They got to have, all this stuff. And the more the kids are on those devices, the worse they've actually ended up doing over time. And a lot of this research is coming out that they remember it better when they write it with their hands. And there's a certain amount. So I'm wondering if there could be an educational revolution where it might say we need to go completely backwards and say no technology in schools, or limited. It's going to be limited to very specific types of learning and specific things. But like because they have like kids on iPads like in first grade. And so they're losing that, like, how do you read in a book? How do you, and some people might say, who cares if they do that, if it's better to do it on something else? And the data is showing it's not better, right? We're actually the kids are remembering more and they're doing better when it's something tactile, right? They're doing this thing instead of touching a screen. Now, is it better to do, once you get to a certain point in your education, a computer could do really well in figuring out, and they have these now, you seem to really be struggling with how to convert, fractions into, improper fractions or whatever. But you're really good over here, and so we can spend more time practicing with you on this thing you're struggling with, and not make you do a bunch of work on what you've already mastered. We're seeing that works really well, but there's almost this shift, and there needs to be more of a shift of kids need to play. Kids need to touch and feel and experiment, and we need to, not getting back to, not to, we're giving all the props to all the Scandinavian countries and all those parts of the world, but they've already figured that out, right? The amount of play that they have in their day is 3 times what our kids get, and they're getting them ready to practice how to learn and how to be curious and how to figure things out, so that later on when they get to these really complex problems, it's not just a few people who are figuring this out. It's a lot of their society is a part of figuring out that problem.
Chris, we're about out of time, but I'm not letting you off the hot seat without answering one last question for me. And I want to come full circle. So we started off by talking about your eclectic background. And now I want to know, will there ever be a digital version of Chris Dyer?
A digital version.
Think about all the things that, your life story, the arc of your career. You mentioned how you stumbled into interesting opportunities. Which parts of Chris could be digitized?
You certainly could replicate what I know now and synthesize that in a way that would sound like me. I mean, I go into ChatGPT all the time and say, help me write this email in the voice of, and I insert a person, right? And there's enough data in there that they can replicate that voice or take a pretty good guess. And it gives me variety, right? I know probably one of the most famous speakers has been a mentor of mine for a while, Marshall Goldsmith. He's literally has a Marshall Goldsmith AI now, and he has taken everything he's written and everything he's ever been recorded of his, and he's put it into his own version of a ChatGPT. He's getting, he's up there in years, and I think he's getting to the point where, he knows that he's on the downward part of his arc. And he wants that. He wants people to be able to access his knowledge and the digitization of him. So he's being intentional about it. So a lot of it certainly can be. But what you will never be able to replicate is what I might actually be bizarrely curious about and just accidentally say yes to. There is a randomness to that. Some of the things that have happened in my life where, I mean, in 2018, I decided I was going to say yes to every single question that was asked of me. I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to be taken advantage of, but I said yes to everything. Now, I used yes and I use yes, but to help me navigate that. But I found myself in a conference in Guatemala that I should have never gone to, right? On paper, it was the stupidest idea for me to go there. It was a waste of time, energy, resources. I shouldn't have been away from my company, my family, but I said yes to everything. And so I went to this conference, and there ended up being way less people than they promised. It was a total bust from that perspective. And while I'm giving my speech to 12 people, when it's supposed to be like 1,200 people, a volcano's going off, and all of our flights have now been canceled, and we're stuck in the country. I mean, everything you could think of. And yet, what I remember about that experience is I made 10 really close friends that I'm still close to today, that we were brought by that experience together. And I still chat with them every single month. I mean, that kind of like camaraderie you only get like when you're in school together or on a sports team together or in a club together or something, for a long period of time. And in 3 or 4 days, the 10 of us became the best of friends, and it's still there. How do you replicate that? Right? That's not possible. You can get maybe an idea of what I might think or feel, but there is that randomness of what stupid thing I might go do and what good thing might come out of it. So
I love that example. That serendipity. That's a metaphor for the human experience. I'm glad you shared that.
thank you.
Well, Chris, hey, we're out of time. Where can the audience learn more about you and your work?
Sure. You're welcome to go to chrisdyer.com. There's everything you need to know there. If you're looking for a speaker or consultant or trainer, I'm always doing stuff like that. And if you just want to connect on LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram or wherever you hang out, I'm pretty much on all the platforms. I do a lot of content there. So look me up. I'm there. I'm not the Peruvian artist living in Canada. There's another Chris Dyer. I'm not that one. My dreads are not that long. So I'm the other guy with the white glasses. So
If you keep saying yes, Chris, maybe eventually that other one will be you as well.
he does some cool stuff. I'll give him that.
All right. Hey, Chris, thanks for hanging out. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, Dan.
Good stuff. Gosh, that's a wrap for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.